In a luxurious home, there lived a girl who stays with her parents. Her name was Emily. Emily was a teenage girl who was very rebellious and often disrespectful to her parents. Her parents were loving towards her, but she refused to acknowledge it. One day, Emily walked in from school. She opened the entrance door and met her parents in the living room, discussing, and as usual, she disregarded them and made her way upstairs. Mr. Kunle, who was her father, got annoyed by her attitude and asked his wife what kind of daughter they got. But the wife only assured him that everything would be fine eventually, and Mr. Kunle agreed with her immediately. Maybe she needs more love and attention, she concluded. Then she told her husband she would go check on Emily, and her husband agreed, so she made her way to Emily's room. When Emily saw her mother walking into her room, she got annoyed and told her she should have at least knocked, and her mother quickly apologized. Her mother tried to remind her of their love towards her, but she declined. Instead, she told her mother she had assignments to do and she needed privacy, and because that was what she wanted, her mother gave her her privacy and left her room after telling her she loves her and that she would always be there for her, which Emily didn't pay attention to as she continued with her phone. Her mother, Mrs. Kunle, headed straight to her room and told her husband how her time went with Emily, and Mr. Kunle was not happy with the report, and he became angry and sad at the same time. He didn't know what to do and started losing hope, but Mrs. Kunle kept on assuring him that everything would be just fine. She just needs more affection, she concluded. The next day at the house of Mr. Kunle was in the living room with his wife. They were both discussing when Mrs. Kunle received a call, and after the phone conversation, she got shocked at the news she received. Her husband asked her what the matter was, and she told him the call was from the school and the report was that Emily got into a fight with two boys. When Mr. Kunle heard this, he got infuriated, and immediately Emily walked in looking angry. She made her way to her room, but her father stopped her and asked her to come over to the living room where they were. Then he told her to explain the fight that happened, and all she said was that it wasn't her fault and that the boys started it. Mr. Kunle wasn't satisfied with her explanation, and out of annoyance he asked her to leave. Please go to your room and come back for dinner later. But she replied that she wasn't hungry and left angrily. Are we not being too harsh on her? Mrs. Kunle asked her husband, but he told her he wasn't and that he would find out what really happened in school. And just as they were discussing, they heard a knock on the door, and it was Chioma. Chioma was a close friend of Emily. Good afternoon, ma. Good afternoon, sir, she greeted. Mr. and Mrs. Kunle were very much glad to have her. They asked her how she was doing and told her she could go see Emily in her room, and immediately she left after thanking them. Chioma made her way to Emily's room. She knocked the door, and when she heard coming, she went in, and Emily was happy to see her. They hugged each other and began to gist about school. You didn't tell me you were coming, Emily said, and Chioma said she came to see her after the encounter in school. Then Emily smiled and thanked her for being there. Chioma then asked her what her parents said about it, but Emily said she didn't remember, which made Chioma shocked by her response and asked Emily why she keeps speaking of her parents that way. Parents that just gave birth to me and dumped me. All they do is imprison me and pretend like they care, she said, and Chioma was shocked at her words. She tried to encourage Mia by telling her it's because she's their only child and that they are afraid of losing her. She reminded her how the world is wicked and told her her parents are only trying to protect her. But Emily protested and didn't want to believe. She said it didn't look to her that way, and that she wished they would be out of her life for good, and concluded that she was tired of seeing her parents' faces. But Chioma insisted and still encouraged her that her parents loved her so much, and it's why they do what they do. She tried to convince Emily, but Emily still didn't want to listen. So instead, Chioma changed the topic and told Emily that she was hungry, and Emily said she feels likewise and even worse. So they both headed down to the kitchen. A week later, Emily was on holiday, so her parents planned a family trip. They informed Emily about it, but she insisted that she wouldn't join them. "I don't want to be a part," she concluded. Her parents got sad by her response. They told her her favorite uncle was coming along, but she still insisted that she wouldn't go. So her parents left her to their room after trying to convince her. 2 days later, her uncle came home. Emily was happy to see him, but when he told her he'd also be going for the trip, she still didn't agree to go. "I don't want to be where my parents are," she concluded angrily. Her uncle, Mr. Ade, tried to convince her, but she still didn't want to go. Later sometime, her parents joined them in the living room. They told her they have concluded that they'll be leaving by evening and asked her if she'd be going with them. But she still insisted that her final answer was no, and she would go over to her friend's place, Chioma. Her parents forced themselves to agree since that was what she wanted, and by evening they drove off, and Emily went to Chioma's house. She spent all her time there and didn't bother to call her parents. She was dancing at Chioma's house when she got a call from her uncle that her parents got into a fatal accident. She thought it was his usual prank and didn't bother, so she continued dancing because she was having fun at Chioma's house. After some time, she got another call from her uncle telling her to hurry up to the hospital, that her parents want to see her quickly. She still didn't believe, so she sluggishly went there, and by the time she got there, it was too late. Her parents were gone. Emily couldn't believe her eyes. She was shocked to her bones. At that point, she could no longer feel her body. She was weak and out of strength. Her uncle turned to her. "You were all they talked about on their way. Your name was the last thing they mentioned before they passed on. Your parents never stopped loving you, Emily," he said and walked out. And at that point, Emily wished the ground could swallow her. She wished the world would give her a second chance, but it was too late. Her parents were gone. Emily then fell to the ground and cried out loud. She begged her parents to come back to life, but of course, nothing happened. She tried to beg the doctors, but the doctors told her it was too late and they were taking the bodies to the mortuary. Emily cried and cried until there was no more tears left in her eyes. She hated herself the more and wondered who would ever love her the way her parents did, and life became endlessly sad for her. The next day, she began to live with her uncle. Her uncle was married and her cousin was around her age. Her name was Kemi. Every day, Emily watched how close Kemi was with her mother, and that would make her heart full of regrets. She cried every day. One day, she decided to visit her home. She went straight to her parents' room and found some lovely letters and gifts her parents left down for her. After going through them, she cried and wished things would go back. That day, in the evening, her uncle dropped by to take her home, but she refused, saying she wanted to stay with her parents and that she didn't want to leave them. Emily remained there for days and refused to eat. Life was full of pain for her. Some years later, she was able to come out of the pain and frustration. At school, Emily gave a speech, sharing her story and lesson learned about love, respect, and regrets.